You think you know fried chicken? You don't. Not until you've stood in a kitchen with a black grandmother who learned from her grandmother, who learned from hers, in an era when making something extraordinary out of very little wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was survival. These women didn't have food science degrees, they didn't have YouTube tutorials. What they had was generations of passed down knowledge, sharp instincts, and a deep understanding of ingredients that modern food scientists are only now catching up to. Today, we're counting down 25 of the most brilliant fried chicken tricks that black grandmothers were using back in the 1960s that were quietly dismissed, ignored, or outright banned from mainstream cooking shows and recipe books of that era. Techniques that food scientists, chefs, and culinary researchers are now calling ahead of their time. Calling genius. So sit down, get comfortable, and pay attention because Big Mama's kitchen is officially open. Let's start the countdown. Number 25. Soaking the chicken in salted water the night before. Now, most people think a brine is something fancy restaurants do, but Big Mama was doing this in her cast iron pot every single Friday night before Sunday dinner. She'd dissolve a generous handful of salt into cold water, sometimes adding a splash of apple cider vinegar, and let those pieces sit overnight in the icebox. Here's why it works. Salt draws moisture into the muscle fibers through a process called osmosis, then begins to break down some of the proteins. The result is chicken that stays juicy even after sitting in a screaming hot pan of grease. The vinegar lowers the pH of the surface, which tenderizes the meat further. Scientists call this wet brining, and it's now considered one of the most effective moisture retention techniques in professional cooking. Big Mama just called it doing it right. Number 24. Adding a spoonful of sugar to the flour coating. Sweet William's grandma in Alabama swore by this, and her family thought she was just being eccentric. A teaspoon of white sugar mixed right into the seasoned flour seemed like it made no sense. But sugar caramelizes at high heat, which means it creates that deep mahogany brown color on the crust faster and more evenly than flour alone. It also helps lock in a slight crunch that doesn't disappear after the chicken rests. Food scientists now understand that this triggers the Maillard reaction more efficiently, producing those complex flavor compounds that make a good crust taste almost sweet. Savory in a way that's completely addictive. 1 teaspoon per cup of flour, that's the ratio. Don't go overboard or it'll burn before the chicken cooks through. Number 23. Rinsing the chicken with lemon juice before seasoning. In communities across the South and in black households from Atlanta to Detroit, rinsing raw chicken with lemon juice or diluted white vinegar was absolutely standard practice. The mainstream culinary world spent years telling people not to wash chicken at all, claiming it spread bacteria around the sink. But what those warnings missed was the functional purpose of an acid rinse. Lemon juice is acidic enough to begin breaking down surface proteins, which opens up the tissue so seasoning actually penetrates rather than just sitting on top. You rinse, pat dry, then season, and what you get is chicken where the salt and spices have actually entered the meat. Modern chefs now call this a surface acid treatment. Big Mama called it getting the slime off and making it ready. Number 22. Seasoning in stages, not all at once. Nana didn't dump all her seasoning into the flour and call it a day. She seasoned the chicken directly before the flour, seasoned her flour mixture separately, and then sometimes hit the finished piece lightly again after it came out of the oil. This 3-stage seasoning approach creates depth. When you season the raw meat, salt starts drawing flavor into the flesh. When it hits seasoned flour, a new flavor layer forms on the crust, and that final light hit after frying wakes everything up because hot oil and hot meat are still slightly porous and absorb a little more. Food scientists describe this as layered seasoning, and it's used in high-end restaurants to create complexity. In the black community, it was just how you cooked. There was no shortcut that produced the same result. Number 21. Using evaporated milk instead of regular milk for the dredge. You'd open Grandma Pearl's refrigerator and find those small cans of evaporated milk tucked in the back. She'd mix them with a little hot sauce and dip every piece of chicken before it went into the flour. Evaporated milk is thicker and has higher protein and fat content than regular milk, which means it creates a more substantial adhesive layer that holds the flour coating on during frying. It also has a slightly caramelized flavor from the heating process used to concentrate it, which adds another layer of depth to the crust. That thick coat means the breading doesn't slide off in the pan, which is a problem that ruins fried chicken more than almost anything else. The science behind this is protein adhesion, and it works perfectly. Number 20. Letting the coated chicken rest before frying. After Mama Dot dredged her chicken pieces through the flour, she didn't immediately drop them in the grease. She set them on a wire rack over a sheet pan and let them sit for at least 20 to 30 minutes. What's happening during that rest is critical. The moisture from the meat slowly hydrates the flour coating, turning it from a dry powder into a paste-like layer that grips the chicken firmly. This resting also allows the coating to dry slightly on the outside, which creates a more even crust when it hits the oil. If you skip this step, you get flour that puffs off in the pan, leaving bald spots on your chicken and a greasy mess in your oil. The technique is now recommended in culinary schools. In the 1960s Black Kitchen, it was just common sense. Number 19. Adding garlic powder and onion powder directly to the soaking liquid, not to the flour, to the actual liquid the chicken soaked in overnight. Grandma Rose had a very specific way of doing this. She'd dissolve her salt, add her vinegar, and then stir in garlic powder and onion powder so they were evenly distributed throughout the soaking liquid. The result is that the allium compounds in those powders, the sulfur-based flavor molecules, penetrate the meat during the overnight soak rather than just coating the outside. You get chicken that tastes seasoned all the way through, not just on the surface. Scientists now know that lipid-soluble flavor compounds can migrate into meat tissue over time, especially in the presence of an acidic solution. Big Mama's overnight soak was essentially a flavor infusion system. Number 18. Double dredging with a wet and dry stage in between. Most people do one dip in egg or milk, one dip in flour, and that's it. But in southern Black kitchens, the serious cooks did 2 full cycles. Wet, dry, wet, dry. You dip in the liquid, let the excess drip off, roll in seasoned flour, then go back into the liquid, then into the flour again. What this builds is a multi-layered crust with genuine structural integrity. The inner layer bonds to the meat, the outer layer creates the crunch, and the alternating wet and dry stages create a crust with micro pockets and ridges that get extra crispy in the oil. Those ridges are where the crunch lives. This is now a professional technique used in high-end Southern food restaurants, but it was standard in Black grandmothers' kitchens for decades before anyone in a chef's coat wrote it down. Number 17. Frying in lard or a mix of lard and Crisco. Now hear this out before anyone starts talking about health because the science is actually interesting. Lard has a high smoke point, similar to many refined vegetable oils, but it also contains monounsaturated fats that create a different texture and flavor profile in the finished crust compared to pure vegetable shortening. Grandma Lottie kept a coffee can of rendered lard on her stovetop that never seemed to run out, and she'd add fresh Crisco when the level got low. The blend of animal fat and vegetable shortening creates a frying medium that produces a crust that is both crispy and rich, with a savory depth that pure vegetable oils simply don't achieve. Food researchers have studied this and found that animal fats create more complex browning compounds during frying than many vegetable alternatives. Grandma Lottie's coffee can was a laboratory. Number 16. Adding hot sauce to the egg wash. Not a lot, just enough. Mama B would crack 2 eggs, add a splash of her favorite hot sauce, a little whole milk, and whisk it together before dipping her chicken. The vinegar in hot sauce is acidic and continues the tenderizing process that started with the overnight soak. The capsaicin doesn't fully survive the frying process, but it leaves a background warmth in the crust that isn't quite identifiable as spicy, but makes the chicken taste more alive and complex. The salt in the hot sauce also seasons from within the coating itself. This is an incredibly efficient multifunction ingredient addition. Scientists now recognize fermented hot sauce as a functional cooking ingredient beyond just heat, and this particular application is genuinely clever flavor layering. Number 15. Seasoning the cooking oil itself. Before Big Mama dropped a single piece of chicken in that cast iron skillet, she'd often let a smashed clove of garlic or a small onion half sit in the hot oil for a couple of minutes, then remove it before adding the chicken. This technique, called aromatizing the oil, infuses the cooking fat with flavor compounds that then transfer to the crust of every piece of chicken that cooks in it. The fat carries those flavors directly into the breading. It's a technique common in French cooking, in Chinese cooking, in African cooking traditions, and it was absolutely present in black Southern kitchens of the 1960s. The mainstream culinary world ignored it as a black cooking technique while celebrating it everywhere else. It works because fat is a flavor carrier, and flavored fat makes everything it touches more delicious. Number 14. Using self-rising flour instead of all-purpose. Grandma Cora from Mississippi did not keep all-purpose flour in her pantry for chicken. She used self-rising flour exclusively, and when relatives asked why, she just said it puffs up better. She was completely correct. Self-rising flour contains baking powder, which releases carbon dioxide when it heats up in the oil. This creates tiny air bubbles throughout the crust as it fries, resulting in a coating that is lighter, more aerated, and genuinely crunchier than all-purpose flour produces. The structure is different at a microscopic level. It's not just a coating, it's a coating with internal structure. Culinary schools now teach the use of leavening agents in fry coatings as an advanced technique. Grandma Cora was doing it because her mother taught her, and her mother's mother taught her mother. Number 13. Patting the chicken completely dry before seasoning and before flouring. Miss Ida was known for using a clean dish towel on every single piece of chicken twice. Once after the wash, and once right before seasoning. Surface moisture is the enemy of a crispy crust. When wet chicken hits seasoned flour, you get gummy patches. When wet chicken hits hot oil, the steam created pushes the coating away from the meat and creates a gap. The oil gets in, and the crust becomes greasy rather than crispy. Removing that surface moisture at both critical stages means your seasoning sticks directly to the meat and your flour adheres uniformly. Pat twice. The first time gets the water off. The second time right before flouring gets any moisture that migrated back to the surface during the seasoning rest. Simple and absolutely backed by food science. Number 12. Resting the fried chicken on a wire rack instead of paper towels. Grandma Joyce had a wire rack set over a sheet pan that she'd pull out every single Sunday. Paper towels trap steam underneath the chicken, softening the crust from below. The bottom of your perfectly fried chicken turns soggy while you think you're draining the oil. A wire rack lets air circulate completely around the piece, draining the oil while keeping the crust crispy on every surface. This isn't just opinion. Food scientists have tested this and confirmed that wire rack resting preserves crust texture significantly better than paper towel resting. The oil drips away, the steam escapes, the crunch stays. Grandma Joyce didn't know the thermodynamics, but she knew her chicken stayed crispy until it hit the table, and that was all the proof she needed. Number 11. Keeping the oil temperature steady by not overcrowding the pan. Mama Frances would fry in batches of 3 or 4 pieces maximum, no matter how many people were coming to dinner. If you add too many cold pieces of chicken to hot oil at once, the oil temperature drops dramatically and stays low while the chicken sits there absorbing fat instead of cooking properly. You get greasy, pale, heavy chicken. Keeping the oil at a steady 325 to 350 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the cooking process means the crust sets quickly and a vapor barrier forms between the meat and the oil, which is actually what prevents grease from soaking in. Maintain your temp. Cook in batches. The patience Mama Frances showed while her family waited in the next room was itself a cooking technique. Number 10. Adding a small amount of cornstarch to the flour mixture. Miss Clara always had a box of Argo cornstarch on her counter, and she'd add about 2 tablespoons per cup of flour in her dredging mix. Cornstarch interferes with gluten development in the wheat flour, which means the crust sets up crispier because there's less chewy gluten structure. It also browns differently than wheat starch, creating a more even, glass-like crunch that holds up longer. The ratio matters. Too much cornstarch and the crust becomes too brittle and flakes off. 2 tablespoons per cup is the sweet spot that produces maximum crunch without sacrificing structure. This is now a signature technique in Korean fried chicken, which is celebrated worldwide for its crispy coating. Black grandmothers in America were doing it 50 years earlier with Argo cornstarch from the corner store. Number 9. Using black pepper generously and freshly ground, not the stuff that comes pre-ground in the small tin. Grandma Vera had a pepper grinder on her table, and she used it over the flour, over the chicken directly, and sometimes over the finished plate. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine that not only provides heat, but also enhances the absorption of other flavors and nutrients. When you use freshly ground black pepper versus pre-ground, the volatile oils haven't oxidized yet, so the flavor is dramatically sharper and more aromatic. The coarse grind also creates textural contrast in the crust. Grandma Vera's generosity with the pepper grinder wasn't just seasoning, it was chemistry. The piperine in black pepper is now studied for its bioavailability. Enhancing properties and using it fresh is consistently recommended by food scientists for maximum flavor impact. Number 8. Soaking in buttermilk with specific additions. Church supper specialists in the black community had buttermilk soak formulas that were passed down like recipes because they essentially were recipes. The baseline was buttermilk, but the additions varied and were intentional. Grandma Nell added a tablespoon of mustard to her buttermilk soak. The mustard contains enzymes that further break down proteins in the chicken, tenderizing it beyond what buttermilk's natural lactic acid alone achieves. The mustard flavor itself largely disappears during cooking, but the enzymatic tenderizing effect remains. You get chicken that is so tender it pulls apart at the bone with the slightest pressure, with a crust that still has snap. Buttermilk marinade is now universally recognized as superior for fried chicken. The mustard addition is the hidden upgrade inside that already excellent technique. Number 7. Covering the pan partially during the first half of cooking. Big Mama Gladys used a lid on her cast iron pan, but only halfway, allowing steam to escape. Here is the genius of this. During the first several minutes of frying, keeping a partial cover traps enough steam near the chicken that the interior cooks faster and more evenly through gentle steam-assisted heat, while the exterior crisps in the oil. If you use a full lid, you trap too much steam and the crust softens. If you use no lid, thicker pieces can get golden outside while remaining undercooked inside. The partial cover is a temperature regulation trick that ensures the inside reaches food-safe temperature at the same time the outside achieves a deep golden crust. Food scientists called this combination cooking. Grandma Gladys called it keeping it right. Number 6. Finishing thick pieces in the oven after frying. Miss Ethel would get her chicken pieces golden in the cast iron, then transfer them to a pan in a 325-degree oven to finish for 10 to 15 minutes. This two-stage approach solves the fundamental challenge of thick fried chicken pieces. The exterior achieves perfect color and crunch in the hot oil. The interior finishes cooking gently in the dry oven heat without any risk of burning the crust. The oven also helps the crust set further, creating a more durable crunch that doesn't soften as quickly when the chicken rests. For bone-in thighs and drumsticks, this method virtually guarantees juicy interior with crispy exterior every single time. Food scientists and professional chefs now recognize this as the most reliable method for thick-cut fried chicken. Miss Ethel never had a cooking show. She should have. Number 5. Using specific cast iron skillet technique, starting cold oil and building temperature with the chicken in it. Now this one is the most counterintuitive on the entire list. Grandma Rosa would put her chicken in the cast iron, add room temperature oil to cover the bottom portions of the pieces, and then gradually bring the temperature up together. As the oil heats, it slowly renders the skin and outer layer while maintaining moisture in the interior. The chicken begins cooking in a controlled rising temperature environment rather than shock from sudden high heat. This gradual approach produces exceptionally tender meat because the proteins contract slowly rather than seizing up. The crust still develops fully as the temperature climbs, but the interior has had a gentler journey to doneness. This technique is used in can-fit cooking traditions and is now being explored by modern food scientists as a low-stress protein cooking method. Grandma Rosa taught it wordlessly. Number 4. Adding a piece of white bread to the oil. This one sounds the strangest, but the reasoning is sound. Some grandmothers, particularly in communities where keeping cooking oil clean between batches was important, would float a piece of white bread in the oil between batches or at the first sign of the oil darkening. The bread absorbs carbon particles, burnt flour, and small debris that would otherwise continue burning and giving subsequent batches a bitter undertone. It also absorbs excess moisture that accumulates in the oil from the chicken. Clean oil fries, cleaner chicken. The crust stays truer in color, and there's no background bitterness that accumulates across a long frying session. This is essentially filtration, and it works on the same principle as using activated charcoal to purify liquids. Big Mama used Wonder Bread. The result was the same. Number 3. Marinating with paprika specifically for color and crust. Deep red paprika was in every serious black grandmother's spice rack, and it served a very specific purpose beyond just flavor. Sweet and smoked paprika contain carotenoid pigments that produce a deep reddish gold color in the crust as it fries. These pigments are fat-soluble, meaning they transfer readily into the oil around the chicken and back into the crust, creating that gorgeous mahogany color that signals perfectly fried chicken. Beyond color, paprika contributes a subtle sweetness and earthiness that rounds out the sharper notes of black pepper and garlic. Using paprika generously in both the wet marinade and the flour dredge ensures the color develops throughout the entire crust, rather than just on the surface. Food scientists studying carotenoid browning in fried foods now recognize this as a reliable natural coloring and flavor technique. Grandma knew her chicken should look as good as it tasted. Number 2. Keeping the secret seasoning blend in a mason jar. Every serious church cook, every Sunday dinner legend in the black community had a mason jar or an old coffee can with their own blended seasoning mixture already made, already rested, and ready to go. The act of blending your spices ahead of time and allowing them to sit together for days or weeks does something important. The volatile aromatic compounds from different spices cross-pollinate in the closed container. Garlic powder absorbs notes from the smoked paprika. Black pepper mingles with the cayenne. The individual spices become a unified flavor system rather than separate ingredients added one at a time. This is called bloom and meld, and spice companies spend significant research and development money trying to achieve it in commercial blends. Big Mama achieved it in a mason jar on her kitchen shelf. The blend sat there all week, getting better every single day. And number 1, the most game-changing, most scientifically validated, most consistently overlooked genius move in black grandma fried chicken history, adding a tablespoon of pickle juice to the buttermilk brine and using it as a standard practice. This was common in certain households, particularly through the Deep South and up through the migration communities of Detroit, Chicago, and Baltimore. The family jar of dill pickles always had its juice used before it was thrown away, often ending up in the chicken soak. Pickle juice combines acidity with salt with dill aromatics in a single ingredient. The acid does the same tenderizing work as plain vinegar, but the salt simultaneously brines the meat. The dill and garlic from the pickle jar contribute subtle flavor compounds that are almost impossible to achieve by adding those ingredients separately. Fast food chains have discovered pickle brine chicken in the last decade and marketed it as an innovation. Black grandmothers have been doing it since the Kennedy administration. If you have a grandmother, a big mama, a nana, a mama dear, a miss somebody from church, go ask her how she cooks. Ask her why she does each step the way she does. Because buried in her answer is a lifetime of genius that no cookbook has fully captured yet. If you learned something today, share this with somebody who needs to know. And if your grandmother's fried chicken is the best thing you've ever eaten, drop her name in the comments because she deserves to be remembered. See you next time.